So please welcome our next speaker, Steve Reed. You got the floor, sir.
Thank you. Actually, I've got the chair.
Well, you got the. Oh,
I've got
yeah,
the chair.
you got the chair.
I got the chair. So here's the deal. Almost 4 years ago, I turned 65. And I decided I wanted to do something exhilarating and thrilling and exciting to celebrate my 65th birthday. And it worked out that it was going to be either hang gliding, parasailing, or skydiving. And I decided on skydiving. And when I jumped out of the plane, the parachute failed. When I landed on the ground, I had broken my leg. Well, the crazy thing, I don't know how he did it, and Curtis, you can probably tell me how he did it, but I looked at the playback video that my videographer had done for me, and he edited it so it looked like I just fell off a ladder. I fell off a ladder almost 4 years ago. 4 surgeries later, I've got a hunk of metal in my leg, and you've probably all heard about the toy, the children's toy, Weebles. They wobble, but they don't fall down. I do. So instead of me standing and pacing and so forth, I'm going to sit. And we're going to pretend that we're doing some story hour. And we've had some fabulous stories, real life, personal stories. But I'm going to shift it a little bit in that I'm going to tell some stories about people that I've worked with. And it comes out of my book, Restored by Grace. And just a little bit of history on me. My undergraduate degree is in psychology. Graduated way back in the 70s. Shortly after graduating, I got very involved in personal development. I fell in love with personality temperaments. I'm actually a certified DISC analyst, so if you ever need to know about personality temperaments, I can teach you everything about that. But then along the way, I started doing some life coaching. Somebody that I was teaching DISC to says, hey, I need some help personally. Okay, great, no problem. And then somebody would come along, one of the guys I was working with, hey, my wife and I are having some challenges, so we started doing marriage counseling. I've been through countless seminars and programs. So I've got a lot of experience in that area. Well, fast forward, in 2009, at the beginning of every year, I do some type of personal development program. And in 2009, I went through a program. It was called The Road Adventure. And what I didn't know at the time, it was a spin-off from a program that Dr. Phil McGraw had put together. So amazing, amazing program. As I'm going through the program, and I'll share a little bit more. Actually, I'll tell you this little teaser for tomorrow. The night before I went through the program, it was a 3-weekend program. The night before I went through the program, my ex-wife, who we went through a divorce 6 years earlier, finally revealed to me why we went through the divorce. I didn't know. It's because she had multiple affairs while we were married. So I'm carrying this raw information on Friday night, and I'm going through this program. I didn't know it was a healing program for me, because it's different for everybody. And so I'm going through this program, and as I'm going through it, I had already been coaching for about 15 years. And my coach in the program says, Steve, you need to become one of our coaches. And I said, can I get through the healing process myself first? And so we went through the programs, 3 weekends, and I immediately jumped in. And I stayed with that program, actually became one of the overseers of the whole program after a few years, and loved doing it, stayed with that program for about 6.5 years. And God allowed me to touch hundreds of lives through that program. And I want to share a couple of stories. And if we have time, I may even share a third story, but I'll keep my eyes on the clock. Not that I'll pay attention to it, I'm just going to keep my eyes on it. Anyway, and I told Will earlier, hey, you know what it means when a pastor, a preacher, looks at his watch while he's preaching? Absolutely nothing. So my dad was a preacher and I am ordained. Anyway, first story I want to share with you is a story about Joe and Cindy. Now, Joe and Cindy were a young couple. They were in their 30s. They had a couple of young daughters. Life is good. They lived in northern Louisiana, very involved in their church. In fact, Joe was a deacon, and Cindy, if it had anything to do with food or women, she was in the middle of it. Well, a new couple came to the church, and they were troublemakers. They wanted to take over. So the first incident was they were remodeling the sanctuary, and there was a fight about what color the walls were going to be painted. And then the fight went into what color carpeting are we going to use. And the final fight was, are we going to use red grape juice or white grape juice? A trivial thing, but they had a church-wide meeting to decide what kind of grape juice they're going to use. Well, they thought that they had everything decided. The next night, the head elder or head deacon calls Joe up and says, "Hey, are you going to be home for a few minutes?" He's like, "Yeah, sure. What's going on?" He said, "Do you mind if I stop by?" "No, come on over." Well, Cindy, the consummate hostess, she always has a cake or a pie or some ice cream or something that she could share with visitors. This deacon comes walking in, and she's all ready to serve him something. He says, "No, I'm not going to be here that long, and I just don't feel like it." So, "Well, what's going on?" "There was another meeting after the service or after the meeting last night." "Well, we didn't know about that." "It's because it was about you. And the church has voted to kick you out of the church." Just think about that. A church is a hospital for people that need to be healed, and a family that was entrenched, had grown up in their church. They were kicked out. Joe was furious. Cindy, though, she was so devastated, she started building walls. And she built walls that were so thick and so tall that no one could ever penetrate those walls, including her husband. And this went on for years. She'd be walking through town. Friends that she had had for 30 years would walk on the other side of the street. I don't know if they were ashamed, embarrassed, frustrated, angry. I don't know what it was. But Cindy felt totally and completely rejected. Fast forward several years, actually 25 years. Their older daughter, Sarah, came through my program, and she got so much out of the program, she insisted that her parents go through the program. They came through the program. Friday night, I'm working with Cindy, somebody else is helping Joe. The very first question that we asked, we started in a big group setting and then whittled down to small groups of 5 to 7 people. There were 1 or 2 coaches in each of these groups. We asked the question, tell us about a time that you felt like you were a victim. Cindy started to gush. The pain was still so raw. It was as if it came right back to the surface. On Saturday morning, we asked another question. Tell us about a time that you felt rejected. Again, Cindy started to pour her guts out. We went through the day several very intense exercises designed to lay the foundation for the healing process. And Saturday afternoon, we asked Cindy, are you ready to start the healing process? And she gleefully said yes. And Cindy very quickly realized that she had to forgive a lot of people. She had to forgive that family that came in and disrupted everything. She had to forgive the pastor of the church, the other deacons, other church members. She had to forgive her husband because she thought he could have solved the problems, even though his hands were tied. But the number one person she had to forgive was God, because she felt like God had abandoned her.
Yep.
We get through the entire program, and Cindy was restored by God's grace. She was a broken vessel, and she is now usable for God's glory. At the end of the second weekend, her husband, Joe, came looking for me, tracked me down, gave me a huge bear hug, He says, I just want to say thank you for giving my wife back to me. We haven't been intimate in years. Think about the barriers, that walls that she built, and think about the walls that we build ourselves. Now, normally when I start doing this presentation, I normally ask, I don't want a show of hands because I know the answer already, but how many of us have been rejected, abandoned, victimized, or abused? Abused in any way. Now, I don't need a show of hands because I know it's 100% of it, myself included. Let me tell you about Candy. When Candy's saga started, she was about 13 years old. Precious young thing. Unfortunately, her mom and dad had gone through a divorce, but her mom remarried, and her stepfather, great, hardworking man. Her mother was a nurse, night nurse in the local hospital. She also had a stepbrother that came into this relationship. Well, this stepbrother had a best friend. His name was Bubba. At least that's what I called him. One afternoon, Bubba came for a visit. He wanted to see Candy's stepbrother, so he said. But that's not why he was there. Bubba and his father were rebuilding a Corvair. Some of you may remember Corvairs. Back in their garage, in the barn in the back. And Bubba says, hey, can you take me back and show me the car? Yeah, sure. Keep in mind, Bubba's around 17 years old. Candy's about 13 years old. Very innocent, very impressionable. And Bubba starts making suggestive comments to her. And I think you see where this is going. This pattern continued for the next few weeks, and then all of a sudden, Bubba started to molest sweet Candy. A week or so later, he's back again. But this time it went farther, and he raped her. And this pattern continued. Every time there was a threat, you can't tell anybody this is going on. You would hate to have something bad happen to your parents or your brother. And then one day he introduced drugs and alcohol to her. And then one day he brought some friends over and they gang raped her. And then one day he said, let's go for a ride. And he took her to a major city here in Texas. I don't know where. She never told me. And she was sold into prostitution. And she lived there for 10 years, moving from city to city, because anytime she would get comfortable, her pimp would be afraid that she was going to escape. She was in and out of jail, hooked on drugs, exotic dancer, countless men that objectified her. Thankfully, she was rescued. And she was taken to a halfway house in San Antonio, where she was cleaning up and she's starting to do better, but she still has this wound, intense wound. She came through my program about 9 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. And when she came through the program, I always ask the people that are coming through, who are you? And she said, well, I'm a prostitute. She said, no, that's what you used to do. Who are you? I'm a drug addict. No, you're beyond that. Who are you? And she couldn't answer it. Over the next 2 weekends, we worked tirelessly. I got to a point at one time, I wanted to find a crowbar, a tire iron, a baseball bat, whatever, and I wanted to find Bubba. At the end of every day, I would go home and I would take a very long shower because I had to clean the filth off of me that I was carrying from her. She didn't need to carry this anymore. And finally, on Friday night of the second weekend, we got to the point, and this was the creme de la creme for the weekend. And we took them through an exercise to discover who they really are. And I said, Candy, who are you? And what she said made my heart leap for joy. She says, I am God's beautiful princess.
Yes.
And every voice in the house was singing praise. You see, Candy was restored by God's grace.
Amen.
She was a broken vessel, now usable for God's glory. Last one real quick. Young boy, 10 years old. His name is Ron. Typical 10-year-old, okay? Rambunctious, very competitive young fellow. In fact, one afternoon, he's done with school. He's in the school play, not school, but in the local park, and they're having a swinging contest. Now, I don't mean dancing swinging. I mean swing set swinging. And so far, he's the champion, okay? Well, Ron had a curfew. He had to be home by 5 o'clock to get ready for dinner, do his homework, get a bath, and go to bed. Well, unfortunately, Ron is at the top. He's at the apex. He's winning. And the clock tower in the city hall chimed 5 o'clock, and he knew he was in trouble. He got off the swing as fast as he could, ran home as quickly as he possibly could, and waiting for him was his grandmother. He loved his grandmother. Every time he would get to go and spend the weekend with his grandmother, she would let him stay up as long as he wanted to stay up, eat anything he wanted to eat, watch anything on TV. Didn't make any difference. She was his favorite. He called her Nana. His grandfather had passed away, so now Nana is living with them. Ron walks through that door, and Nana's waiting for him with a wooden spoon. And she starts to beat him repeatedly. But it wasn't the physical beating. It was the emotional and verbal beating they got. You're worthless. You'll never amount to anything. Why can't you tell time? Why can't you act like the other boys and girls in the area? You are so disobedient. You're going to go to your room without dinner. And that was it. And that pattern continued over and over and over and over. And the longer it went on, the more Ron was emasculated. Ron's in high school now. The physical beating had stopped, but the verbal abuse was continuing. A Marine recruiter shows up at school one day, and Ron says, "Pick me." Shortly thereafter, he turned 18 years old. He signed the paperwork. He went home that night and said, "I'm leaving on Friday, and you can't talk me out of it." Well, where are you going? They think he's just going away with some friends. I joined the Marines, and I leave on Friday. And Ron swore that as long as his grandmother was around, he wasn't going to come back. Now, a couple of years later, he did come back. He wanted to see some of his high school buddies. And they went to the local hangout. It was a little ice cream shop. Now, this is back in New Jersey. And that was the place where all the cute young girls would come, okay? So Ron's sitting there with his buddies, and sure enough, some 20-something girls, 20 years old-ish, come walking through the door, giggling, snickering, typical young ladies. And Ron spots this woman. He's thinking to himself, she is so beautiful, she looks like an angel. Ron's a Marine. He's been in the service now for 2 years. He carries himself like a Marine. He looks like a Marine. He gets up quickly, walks over, he says, "Hi, my name is Ron. I think you look like an angel, and that's what I'm going to call you. I'd like your phone number. I'm only in town for a few days." She quickly pulls out a pen and starts writing her number on a napkin. Meanwhile, her girlfriends are snickering and giggling. Ron gets the napkin, walks back over, finishes his ice cream, leaves. The next morning, he calls her up exactly as promised. They spent every waking moment until he had to go back to base. He was shipped out for a few months, had a short tour of duty, came back, and the communication just ramped up. Not long thereafter, they decided They wanted to get married. And of course, Ron is there in his handsome dress uniform, that short haircut, clean, kind of like you, Will. but that style, that kind of brutish look. She's there in her beautiful white dress. Not too long thereafter, they started having children. And then Angel got the phone call that you never want to get. Your father has cancer. You need to come home. We need help. So they packed everything up. By this time, they were living in Texas, in the Dallas area. Ron was the weapons guy for a police department in the Dallas area. He left his job, hoping to come back to it, but he didn't know. They moved temporarily to New Jersey. A few months later, her father did in fact pass away. Ron continued looking for a job, couldn't find anything. Finally decided, we still have the house back in the Dallas area, let's go back. So they came back. Ron started his job search all over again. Unfortunately, that weapons position was no longer available at the police department. The only thing he could find was a night security guard. Along the way, Ron made some foolish choices, some personal choices, almost cost him his marriage. The worst part about that was his grandmother came back to life in the form of his mother-in-law. You're worthless. You're no good. You're lazy. You can't provide for your wife, for my daughter, for my grandchildren. You're a bum. And that happened day after day after day. Ron thought he was beyond that. But once again, Ron was feeling emasculated. Somehow Ron and Angel came through our program. I don't know who invited them, doesn't matter. But they came through the program. The same thing, tell us about a time you were a victim, tell us about a time you were rejected, etc. We continued on that healing journey. At the end of the second weekend, I go through the same process. Tell me who you are. On Friday night, the first weekend, Ron couldn't look me in the eyes and tell me who he was. It was, I'm a security guard. On that Friday night, a couple of weeks later, Ron, who are you? I'm a mighty warrior for God.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Ron, I'm not buying it. Who are you? I'm a mighty warrior for God. I'm not buying it. I just don't feel it. I'm a mighty warrior for God. Do you believe it? I am a mighty warrior for God! Silence in the whole room. And everybody knew that Ron was a mighty warrior for God. He was a broken vessel, restored by God's grace, and usable once again for God's glory. My hope is that you could relate to one or multiple of these stories. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to be sharing some insights in the process that I've been using. So the first book is Restored by Grace. Ron, Joe, and Cindy and Candy's stories are in there, a lot more detail. But I've got the process that I use, the step-by-step process that I use to help people find out who they really are. The title of the book is Who Are You Really? And I walk people through the entire process. I want to encourage you. Come, be prepared to take some notes. Now, shameless self-promotion. Bring your checkbooks or your, no, I don't take checks. Bring your credit cards or cash or whatever. But it's one of those things that you want to take, and you're going to want to share it with other people, because you know people, we all know people who are hurting in some way that need to be restored by God's grace. I'm going to close with this. This is my purpose. I want to bring light and hope into your world so that you can live a more victorious life. God bless each and every one of you.